Which are better, large or small countries? Which are more successful? These questions may seem silly, but to viewer, I guarantee you they are not. We live in a world that is gaining more and more countries, so obviously countries, they are becoming smaller. Since 1950, our world has gone from having about 60 countries to having more than 200. So this may lead to a few questions. Are smaller countries a good or a bad thing? Are they more viable in some way? Well, these are the questions that we're going to answer in this video, but first, a quick comment. When we're talking about small countries here, we mean countries with a population of fewer than 10 million inhabitants. This includes Hong Kong and Macau, because even though they are a part of China, they have their own laws, they have their own courts and customs, etc. This is a law that grants its citizens rights and freedoms that would be unimaginable in any other place in China, with the exception of Macau, which was integrated into China following the same model. So having said all of that, let's proceed to the key issue. What is happening with these small countries? And this is actually a really important issue in international politics. We all know that a good deal of political conflicts have to do with precisely this, with many territories wanting to declare themselves independent and become new countries. Some examples are Scotland, Catalonia, and Kurdistan.
Strengthen the small.
Now, there's no doubt here, small countries don't usually play a large role in international news. They aren't really involved in major conflicts, they don't participate in major decision-making processes, and truthfully, their political news is not usually that well known. But this is all pretty normal. We all know the president of the United States or France or Russia, but who cares about the rulers of countries like Ireland, Denmark, or Taiwan? Yes, now it's true on VisualPolitik we tend to talk about them, but it's not really that common out there in the real world. Yet, despite all of this, the truth is that in the last 30 years, if something has characterized small countries, it's that they do things a lot better than large countries. In fact, whenever a ranking is published about the richest countries, the most innovative, most competitive, happiest, safest, all of these things, small countries almost always occupy most of the top positions. And yeah, it's usually when we read these rankings that we kind of notice they exist, and we probably ask ourselves, well, how on earth do they do it? You see, if we take, for example, the ranking of the richest countries in the world, that is, the countries with the highest GDP per capita, we find that among the 10 richest countries, 9 of them are small countries. And by the way, out of those 9 countries, 8 have less than 6 million inhabitants. That is, they are much smaller than some cities like Dallas, Philadelphia, or Toronto. If we choose the top 25 countries, things they change a bit, but not that much. Out of the top 25 richest countries in the world, 17 are small countries. And if we take price differences into account, that is, if we take the GDP per capita paired with purchasing power, the facts are even more shockingly one-sided. In that case, 14 of the richest territories in the world are all small. And we're talking about really, really different countries here. Some have a high population density, like Singapore, and others have a really low one, like Finland. Some also have more natural resources, like Qatar, and others have practically nothing, like Ireland. Some are more agricultural and others are more financial. Some are large in territory and others are not. That is to say, there is an absolutely huge variety, but they all have one thing in common, and that's very few inhabitants. We're talking about countries like Iceland, New Zealand, Luxembourg, Norway, Ireland, Denmark, Singapore, Austria, Switzerland, and Finland here. And in 2014 and 2015, 2 studies published by the Credit Suisse research unit corroborated this exact situation. See, these studies found that small countries tend to be richer, more egalitarian, and more socially advanced. In fact, on average, they invest a lot more in things like their education and health. And if that wasn't enough, small countries tend to have more lawful accounts, have less debt, less deficit, and even fewer taxes. Even if we look at their financial markets or stock exchanges, for example, we will see that in the last decades, small countries' markets have performed the best. Have a look at this chart. So now I'm probably going to voice the question that all of you are thinking in your minds right now, and that's, well, how on earth is this happening? Well, let's have a look.
key to success.
Why do small countries work better than larger ones? Aren't big countries supposed to have larger markets, more business opportunities, and a greater ability to take advantage of economies of scale? So what's failing here? And just before we get into it, I do want to say that I am excluding tax havens here because that's not really fair. Neither Finland, Austria, Denmark, or New Zealand, for example, can be considered under any circumstances tax havens. So what is the explanation here? Well, as we usually say at VisualPolitik, there's never a single cause, but we can say that these countries' prosperity comes largely from their own weaknesses. Yeah, you heard that right. See, these small countries are involved in more international trade, not only to sell, but also to buy the products they need. A small country, obviously, they can't produce everything they need. Also, they are more exposed to competition and the swings of the international financial markets. This all forces them to be more prudent with their accounts, to keep themselves competitive, and of course, since they can't afford them, to avoid the implementation of protectionist policies. In fact, want to take a look at another data point? See, 21 out of 25 of the most globalized countries, that is, countries that are most open to the movement of goods, people, and capital, are small countries. On the one hand, if we want to see how these countries' economy and company competitiveness work, we only need to take a look at, for example, the World Bank's Doing Business Index, which, as you know, classifies countries based on their ease of doing business. The latest Doing Business 2018, which the World Bank published on October 31st, 2017, is also dominated by small countries. New Zealand, Singapore, Denmark, and Hong Kong occupy 4 of the top 5 places. And among the top 25 countries in the world for doing business, 16 are small countries. And there's something even more important. See, small countries tend to have much less bureaucracy. First, because they don't need so many political structures, or at least it's harder to justify them. Second, because citizens tend to be more aware of the costs involved. And third, because they simply can't afford it. The result of all of this is that small countries, they tend to be more flexible, more competitive, and less bureaucratic. Of course, some of you might be thinking right now, well, Simon, couldn't small countries be richer because they were created in richer zones and richer territories? Well, the honest truth of that is simply no. There's the case of Ireland and there's the case of Singapore, for example, which just a few decades ago were quite poor countries and are nowadays 2 of the richest countries in the world. Another good example is the old Republic of Czechoslovakia.
The proof of separation.
In 1993, Czechoslovakia decided to divide into 2 smaller countries, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. At that time, both countries, which used to form Czechoslovakia, suffered the effects of the Soviet Union's fall and underwent a severe transition. However, despite this, the Czech side was still much richer than the Slovak side. In fact, in Slovakia, the per capita income was only 65% of Czech, unemployment rates were almost 5 times higher, and the Slovak Republic depended too much on the money that came as interregional solidarity from the richest part of the country, that is the Czech part. Well, since they separated in 1993, both countries have done quite well. They successfully transitioned from a communist model to a capitalist model and have both grown considerably more than, for example, Germany. Now, out of these 2 countries, the one that has progressed the most has been Slovakia. Yes, having to organize itself while having to compete actually favored the poorest. You can see the clear convergence that has occurred between both countries in the following graph. We'll explain everything about this in an upcoming video. But before we're done, we just want to have one last note here.
The new world configuration.
Globalization has led to countries with a large population no longer having the upper hand. And it's not just that. The truth is that in this world, fostering traits such as competitiveness, openness, and adaptability are becoming increasingly important. And for the time being, dear viewer, small countries seem to be even more efficient at this. And not just small countries, but even cities. Yeah, you heard me right there. In our world, big cities have become the most important economic growth drivers. This includes London, New York City, Hong Kong, Singapore, Macau, cities that play an increasingly important role in our world. The economy of Jakarta, for example, grows twice as much as Indonesia's economy. New York's GDP is twice that of Sweden, and the countries that have the highest percentage of the population living in cities tend to be richer. So that leaves me wondering, based on that information, shouldn't we all bet on smaller, decentralized states, or even give cities some measure of independence? I'll just leave that thought right there. Of course, none of this compares to the influence that the development of supranational organizations have to address, from terrorism to caring for the environment. But now it's your turn. What do you think is better, a world with several small countries or a world with just a few large ones? Well, leave your answer in the comment section below, as well as in this survey. And I do really hope you enjoyed this video. Please do hit that like button below if you did. And do not forget to subscribe to our channel for brand new videos every Monday and every Thursday. And don't forget to check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. And as always, thanks for watching.